on your mind? Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is my March of the Penguins, my waddle of the Penguins through my Penguin Classic wall. Just at a slow and steady pace where we get to concentrate a bit, unlike a lot of library book tours, including a lot of my own library book tours, which has led a number of you to make a scandalous suggestion, which is that you would like to see me do this for every book. Not every Penguin, but every book. Would I go through a book a day for every book I have? Because there's something wrong with you people. But we have noticed, I've mentioned before that we have noticed certain thematic unities that come and go in this, and we are definitely in the middle of one of those thematic unities, a Russian concentration, a concentration on Russian books that I must have organized at one point. I don't remember doing it, but I must have put some of my Russian stuff together. We have hit some of the highlights. We did A Hero of Our Time, we did Crime and Punishment, we did the Brothers Karamazov, and all that time that we've been doing this, there's been one huge name missing. One name that I would suggest is probably synonymous with Russian literature to non-Russian readers. And that name is Tolstoy. And that deficiency is corrected today with Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. This is the Penguin Classic by translation by Rosemarie Edmonds, which I dearly love, and it calls the book Anna Karenin, which is entirely possible. I think the standard way to render this title now is Anna Karenina, but she's Mr. Karenin's wife, so it doesn't matter one way or another. And Rosemarie Edmonds, you might think she wouldn't be a favorite translation of mine because of the things that I've said about the Macduff translation of Dostoevsky. That it rounds things off, that it's safe, it makes things a little safer and a little more English. And Rosemarie Edmonds has come under fire for well over 50 years for doing exactly that for Tolstoy. But there are ways to do that and ways to do that, and her ways of doing that never really bothered me all that much. Could be that I encountered a lot of these Russian classics through her and Constance Garnett, so that I'm giving them more leeway than I do with other translators. Or it could be that these people got to me first, and then I started learning more about what the actual Russian would read like, and that made all subsequent editions, translations that did this sort of normalizing look a little wrong. I don't know, one way or another, I really appreciate Rosemarie Edmonds' translation. I can certainly easily recommend it. And this is, of course, Tolstoy wrote this in, I think, the 1880s, but came out with it in the 1880s, and it was quickly hailed everywhere as a great novel. In fact, much like the Brothers Karamazov, only I think with a lot more viability, this has often been hailed as the single greatest novel ever written in any language, but from any literary tradition. I still don't think that's true. I said it about the Brothers Karamazov. I've certainly fended off criticism like that for Crime and Punishment, although I admit it's a shifting sand of how you evaluate such a thing. But if I had to make a call for which not necessarily was the better novel, but best novel of all time, I would probably give that closer to Crime and Punishment than I would to the Brothers Karamazov, even though the Brothers Karamazov is a much greater Tolstoy novel, a much greater work on the part of that author. It's difficult to say. That's why I think sometimes sweepstakes like that are arid pursuits. It's great that they start conversations, but I don't know how much good they do, and it doesn't matter in this case anyway, because this is an absolutely terrific novel. A story of an entitled and comfortable married woman, the Anna Karenin of the title, who decides to have an affair with Vronsky, to have an affair with a man, even though it seems certain from the beginning that it cannot do anything but destroy the lives of everyone involved. And it does. and the process there is amazing. The process there to watch. This is not a short novel. It's 800 pages. And Tolstoy takes us through the whole process. And it's amazing to the extent to which he does that without moralizing. It's amazing that he doesn't really seem to pick a side. He loves Anna, obviously. I don't think there's a reader of this book who doesn't love Anna, but you can still be exasperated by her. And I don't know, I've read this in every English translation. I've read it many times, and I don't often get the feeling of being led by the nose by the author. Show me a 20th or especially 21st century author who could write a book anything like this without moralizing. Not possible. Can't happen. Tolstoy, I think, comes close to doing it. I think that was one of his aims, was to just tell this story as an eye floating above it all, even though it's also inside it all, because he inserts himself into the book. Not by the name Leo Tolstoy, but definitely there's a character in here who is Tolstoy, and it's pretty unapologetic. And that would ordinarily take me so far out of the book that I wouldn't ever line up with anybody who would say this is one of the greatest novels of all time. But in Tolstoy's case, it works. Everything in this novel works. You're hearing a tone of reserve in my voice. I'm sure you are. Some of you, the keener listeners of you are. And the handful of you who know me in real life already know what that reserve is, which is that Tolstoy wrote another novel that I hold in far greater esteem than this. It's the same old problem I have with Homer, where everybody knows and loves the Odyssey. But my favorite Homer is not the Odyssey. It's the same thing with Anna Karenina. Anna Karenina has a very clear through line of a plot. It has a sprawling cast of characters, but only a couple of them, a tiny handful of them, are major characters, and they are major characters. They vastly overshine the minor characters. And Tolstoy wrote another novel that I'm sure we will get to in The March of the Penguins that it doesn't, none of that is true for the other great novel. I won't spoil what it is, although all of you know. Because if Anna Karenina is widely regarded as, I have heard it called one of the greatest novels ever written. I've heard it called the greatest novel ever written. I've heard it called the greatest Russian novel ever written, the greatest Russian novel of the 19th century ever written, etc., etc., etc. If Anna Karenina is associated with all of those things, then the other novel I'm talking about by Tolstoy is associated with a whole bunch of other things that we'll get to. In due time, we will get to them. But your penguin for today is not long. This is a very simple story. And it has an immortal opening line that has been quoted and paraphrased to death. The opening line of this novel, a variation on from the Russian of all happy families are happy alike, whereas every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Some variation on that. That, along with calling any book in English The Reckoning and a bunch of other things, I would say there ought to be a moratorium on that. So if you are, let's say, a book reviewer, and you have been given a review of, let's say, a family riddled with meth addiction in the Appalachians of America in the 21st century, and at any point in your review, you say, as Tolstoy once said, all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. It's not just, we have reached a point now, a saturation point now, with allusions to that line, where it shouldn't just be that your editor takes it out. Your editor should also fire you. Should also say, well, I was going to take this commission. I have the spot open on the page for it. But it's not just that I want to remove this line. I also want to deprive you of this commission, so I'm canceling the work. I'll send you a kill fee. But in the future, as a piece of advice, don't ever mention or allude to that line in Tolstoy under any circumstances ever, even in private correspondence, even in your emails. Don't ever mention it again. There is a moratorium on mentioning that line. And yet it is so egregiously over-mentioned that there was just recently a book called Tolstoy Was Wrong. And you don't even need to know anything about the book to know what the author is going to say. The author is going to say that contention is wrong. That line is wrong. The author's not going to talk about Tolstoy's extensive and weird Christianity or his pandering ideas towards the poor of Russia. That's what the author is talking about. The author knows nothing else about Tolstoy but that. Tolstoy was wrong. So, this book, aside from that incredibly abused opening line, is very simple. Anna and Vronsky, that is very simple. The plot line here doesn't stop this from being a toweringly fantastic thing. The Rosemarie Edmonds translation, the Peviar and Volkonsky translation, any translation, Constance Garnett, everybody has translated this. And it's not... I want to say it's not a difficult translation. It is a difficult translation, but not anything like the way that Crime and Punishment or the Brothers Karamazov is. Not anything like that. So my point here, I'm not trying to call it a simple translation, but my point here is any English translation will work just fine to introduce you to most of what is creating the magic in this book. My advice, I know it's cavalier of me because it's a long book, but my advice here would be the same as my advice in most issues of translation, which is read many. Triangulate on the kind of translation that you like, and triangulate through reading many translations, which is what I've done, on what the original probably is, or the shifting sands of the original. Square down on a single chapter or single passages. I've seen people do that. I've walked people through that in many languages. It's very helpful and also very entertaining to do. And it will allow you to figure out what translation you want, which one you want to live with, if you can't read the original. I certainly think that Rosemarie Edmonds is a fine place to start. She was for me. She worked just fine for me with all of Tolstoy. So your Penguin today is not a translation that I'm going to egregiously complain about, and the book itself, oh my. Oh my, no. No, I'm not going to complain about the book at all. It is wonderful. If you haven't tried Anna Karenina, you really should. So that's it for today. I have a feeling, not much, I'm going out on a limb here to say that tomorrow will also be a Russian work, and we shall see. I think we're in a good bank of Russian books probably until next week. But I could be wrong. I'm intentionally not systematizing or looking ahead, so we shall see. We'll tune in tomorrow and find out. Thank you, BookTube.